I grew up in a small town in Ohio in the 50s, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and nothing much ever changed. My father worked at the steel mill for 38 years. Every morning at 5, I'd hear his boots on the kitchen floor, the creak of the front door closing behind him. He'd come home covered in dust, eat dinner in silence, fall asleep in his chair by 7:30. That was love in our house. Showing up, providing, never complaining. I learned early that a man's worth was measured by his work, by what he could produce, by how well he could take care of his family without asking for help or showing weakness. So that's what I did. I worked hard in school, got a scholarship to Ohio State, studied business, graduated with honors. I learned early that a man's worth was measured by his work, by what he could produce, by how well he could take care of his family without asking for help or showing weakness. So that's what I did. I worked hard in school, got a scholarship to Ohio State, studied business, graduated with honors, got hired by a manufacturing company in Cleveland right out of college. I was 22 years old, and I felt like I'd already won. I married Linda when I was 26. She was a nurse at the local hospital, had this way of making everyone around her feel seen and cared for. I fell in love with her the first time she laughed at one of my jokes, this full-bodied laugh that made me feel like maybe I was more interesting than I actually was. We got married in her parents' backyard on a Saturday in June. I remember dancing with her under string lights, thinking this was it. This was the life I was supposed to have. Our daughter Sarah was born 2 years later. I held her in the hospital and felt something I'd never felt before, this overwhelming terror mixed with purpose. I was responsible for this tiny person. I had to work harder, climb higher, earn more. That's what my father would have done. That's what good fathers do. So I worked. I worked late nights and early mornings. I took every promotion they offered me. I traveled for business 3 weeks out of every month. I missed Sarah's first words because I was in a hotel in Pittsburgh. I missed her first steps because I was closing a deal in Atlanta. Linda would call me with updates, and I'd listen from airport lounges, and I'd tell myself I was doing this for them, that they'd understand when Sarah was older. By the time I was 40, I was a regional manager. By 45, I was vice president. By 50, I was making more money than my father made in his entire lifetime. I bought us a big house in a nice suburb. I paid for Sarah's private school. I set up college funds and retirement accounts. I was winning. At least that's what I told myself every time I missed another recital, another parent-teacher conference, another Saturday morning. Sarah grew up quiet, not shy exactly, but careful, like she'd learned early not to ask for too much, not to expect me to be there. She was smart, got good grades, went to a good college, became a lawyer. I was proud of her. I told her I was proud. But looking back now, I wonder if she ever really believed me, because I said the words, but I wasn't there for the moments that mattered. Linda tried to tell me. God, she tried so many times. She'd say things like, Sarah needs you, or I need you, or when are you going to slow down? And I'd promise to do better. I'd take a weekend off, spend Saturday at home, and then Monday morning I'd be right back at it, checking emails before breakfast, staying late at the office. I retired at 66. Walked out of that office on a Friday afternoon with a gold watch and a pension and no idea what to do with myself. Sarah was married by then, living in Boston with her husband Michael. I remember thinking I'd be a good grandfather. This time would be different. 3 years ago, Sarah had a baby boy. They named him Charlie. I flew to Boston the day he was born, held him in the hospital, felt that same overwhelming feeling. that crack in the chest, that promise to myself. I'm going to be here for this one, I thought. But here's the thing about patterns you've spent a lifetime building. They don't just disappear because you want them to. Linda and I would visit Boston every few months. We'd stay for a weekend. I'd hold Charlie, play with him for a while, and then I'd get restless. I'd check my phone even though I didn't have a job anymore. I'd find projects in Sarah's house that needed fixing, spend the whole visit replacing a faucet or painting a fence instead of just sitting on the floor with my grandson. Sarah never said anything, but I could see it in her face. The same disappointment Linda had been showing me for 40 years. Then last summer I started feeling off. This nagging pain in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I ignored it for weeks because that's what I do. Finally went to the doctor when Linda insisted. They ran tests, a lot of tests. Then came the appointment where a young doctor sat me down and told me very carefully that I had pancreatic cancer, that it was already stage 4, that it had spread to my liver. He said the word terminal like he was trying to soften it somehow. He talked about treatment options, about chemotherapy that might buy me some extra months. I sat there nodding, taking mental notes, already thinking about how to solve this problem. What's the best hospital? Who's the best specialist? Linda cried in the car on the way home. I held her hand and told her we'd fight this, that we'd figure it out. And I meant it. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't think my way out of something. I was 71 years old and I was dying, and all I could think about was Charlie, about how he's 3 years old now, about how if I only have a year left, he probably won't even remember me. And then I thought about Sarah, about all the moments I'd missed, about all the times I'd chosen work over her, and I started crying, actually crying, for the first time since I was a kid. Just lying there in the dark next to Linda, tears running down my face. The next morning, I called Sarah, told her about the diagnosis. She got quiet on the phone, that same careful quiet I'd heard from her my whole life. She said she was sorry, said she'd come visit soon, said she loved me. And I said I loved her too, and then we hung up and I sat there holding the phone, feeling like I'd just wasted another opportunity to say something real. A week later, Linda sat me down at the kitchen table. She had this look on her face I'd never seen before, not angry, not sad, just done. She said, "Robert, you're dying, and you've been dying the same way you've lived. Trying to solve it, trying to control it, trying to do everything except actually be here." It hit me like a punch to the gut because she was right. I'd spent the whole week researching treatments, calling specialists, making spreadsheets of survival statistics. I hadn't talked to Linda about how I was feeling. I hadn't called Sarah back. I was doing exactly what I'd always done. Linda reached across the table and took my hand. She said, "You have a year, maybe less. You can spend it fighting something you can't beat, or you can spend it actually living." And then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "I've been married to you for 43 years, Robert. I'd like to actually meet you before you go." I started crying again, right there at the kitchen table, because I realized she was right. I'd given her a house and financial security and 43 years of my physical presence, but I'd never really given her me. So I made a decision. No more treatment, no more research. I was going to spend whatever time I had left actually living instead of trying not to die. I called Sarah that afternoon, asked if Linda and I could come visit for a week. She sounded surprised. I'd always waited for invitations, but this time I asked. I said, "I'd really like to spend some time with you and Charlie, if that's okay." We flew to Boston the next week, and instead of fixing things around Sarah's house, I sat on the floor with Charlie. We played with blocks. We read picture books. We went to the park and I pushed him on the swings until my arms hurt, and it was the best week of my life. I watched Sarah with her son and saw all the ways she was a better parent than I ever was, patient, present, actually listening, and I felt proud and heartbroken at the same time. Heartbroken that she'd had to figure it out on her own. One night after Charlie went to bed, Sarah and I sat on her back porch. We weren't talking, just sitting there in the quiet. And then she said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" I said, "Sure." She said, "Did you ever actually want to be a father? Or was I just something you felt like you were supposed to do?" It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. I wanted to get defensive, to tell her of course I wanted her, but instead I just sat there and let myself feel how much that question hurt. I said, "Sarah, I wanted you more than anything. The day you were born was the happiest day of my life, but I didn't know how to show you. I didn't know how to be a father except the way my father was with me, and he wasn't there either. I thought that's what love looked like. But it wasn't enough, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there." Sarah started crying, and then I was crying, and we just sat there on her porch, finally telling the truth. She said, "I needed you, Dad. I needed you to come to my soccer games and actually watch. I needed you to ask me about school and actually care." I said, "I was always proud of you. I am proud of you." And she said, "Then why didn't you ever tell me?" And I didn't have a good answer, because the truth was I didn't know how. I only knew how to work. We talked for hours that night. I told her things I'd never told anyone, about how scared I was as a young father, about how work was easier than being vulnerable. And she told me about what it was like growing up with a father who was there but not really there. And I realized that everything I thought I was doing for her, I'd actually been doing to her. My absence had shaped her in ways I never intended. I'd given her every material thing she needed and robbed her of the one thing that actually mattered, me, just me, sitting with her, being her father. When we flew home, I was exhausted, but I also felt lighter, like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Linda and I started taking walks every morning, not for exercise, just to walk, to talk. Really talk. I asked her about her painting, about the books she was reading, and I listened, actually listened. She told me about how lonely she'd been during all those years I was traveling, about how she'd thought about leaving me more than once, and hearing that broke something in me, because she'd given me 43 years and I'd spent most of them somewhere else. One morning in October, I was sitting in the backyard with my coffee. It was early, maybe 6. The sun was just coming up, and I was just sitting there, not doing anything, not reading, not planning, just sitting. And I had this moment of clarity, this feeling of being completely present in my own life for maybe the first time ever. And I realized that this moment, this ordinary morning, was more valuable than any promotion I'd ever gotten, any achievement I'd ever chased. Because this was it. This was life. Coffee going cold in my hands, morning light through the trees, the sound of Linda in the kitchen. I went inside and found Linda making breakfast. I walked up behind her and put my arms around her, and she went still for a second, and then she leaned back into me, and we just stood there not saying anything, just being together, and it felt like the most honest thing I'd done in years. Last month, Sarah called and asked if we wanted to come to Boston for Thanksgiving. She said Charlie had been asking about Grandpa, and something about that completely undid me. The idea that this little boy wanted to show me his bike, that I mattered to him. We went, and I spent the whole week on the floor with Charlie. We built structures with his blocks. We baked cookies and made a mess. I didn't think about anything except being right there with him. On our last night, I was putting Charlie to bed. I read him a story and tucked him in, and he looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, will you come back soon?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "I'll come back as soon as I can." And he said, "Okay, good. I love you, Grandpa." I went downstairs and Sarah was sitting in the living room. I sat down next to her and I said, "Thank you." And I said, "For letting me be his grandfather, for giving me another chance." But I did have to thank her, because after everything, she still let me into her son's life. I'm not in denial about what's coming. The doctors say I probably have a few months left. The cancer's progressing. I'm getting weaker. But I'm not scared anymore. Not the way I was at first. Because I finally understand what I should have known at 30. Life isn't something you win. It's not a problem you solve. It's about the small moments you're usually too busy to notice. It's about the people you love and whether you actually show up for them. I spent 50 years trying to build something, and I missed almost everything that mattered. I missed Sarah growing up. I missed 40 years of really knowing my wife. I almost missed Charlie entirely. If I could go back and talk to myself at 30, I'd tell him to slow down. I'd tell him that his daughter needs him more than his boss does. That the moments he's missing while he's at the office are the moments that actually make a life. That you can't get time back. But I can't go back. None of us can. All I can do is tell you what I learned too late. If you have people who love you, be with them. Not physically in the room while your mind is somewhere else. Actually be with them. Put down your phone. Close your laptop. Look at them. Listen to them. Because I'm 71 years old and I'm dying, and the only things that matter to me now are the people I love and whether I loved them well enough while I had the chance. Everything else is just noise. I wake up every morning now, and the first thing I do is go find Linda. I kiss her. I tell her I love her, because she's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I spent 40 years treating her like furniture. I call Sarah every week now. What matters is that I show up, that she knows I'm thinking about her, and Charlie. God, I wish I had more time with Charlie, but I'll take what I can get. I don't know how much longer I have. Could be 3 months, could be 6, but however much time is left, I'm going to be here for it, really here, present. That's what cancer taught me. That's what I should have known at 30. Your life is happening right now, not later. Right now, this moment, and you're either in it or you're not. You're either present with the people you love or you're somewhere else. So that's what I want to tell you. Don't wait until you're dying to start living. Don't wait until it's too late. Be here. Be present while you still have time. Because when you're at the end, none of the other stuff will matter. Not your job, not your achievements. The only thing that will matter is whether you loved people well, whether you were there. I'm Robert Miller. I'm 71 years old. I wasted most of my life. But I'm not wasting what's left. And I hope you won't either.